Hey everyone, welcome to our program. Tonight we are discussing what is next after the election. My name is Hannah Dannenfelser and I'm the chair of the Arlington Committee of 100 and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. If you're watching us on Facebook Live and you think this is something your friends would like to hear, please consider sharing this Facebook Live to your page. We would love to get the word out. We think this is a really important program tonight that people need to hear. So please share with your friends. Please stay in touch with us by liking and following our Facebook page. We do publish our events through Facebook as well as email announcements, and we would like to have you continue to join us throughout the rest of our program here. I want to do a quick welcome to our elected officials who we spotted joining us today. We do have Delegate Patrick Hope who is here. If any of the other elected officials have joined in and we have not spotted you yet, we went based on pre-registration. Please shoot me a chat and I would like to welcome you and thank you for being here. I do want to ask you to please mark your calendars for our next program on Wednesday, December 8th at 7 p.m. We are finalizing the panelist details, but the program is going to discuss Arlington's most talked about neighborhood, National Landing. This is a working title. Maybe our Committee of 100 board members will be far more clever than I am with that title, but it is what we're going with for now. We're going to hear from expert panelists who can tell you about the outlook for that neighborhood and that region and what's to come as it turns into a nationally and internationally recognized hub, which is hosting Amazon's second headquarters. The registration is in your Zoom chat now, so I encourage you to go ahead and sign up and mark your calendars. That will be up on our website shortly, and invitation will be forthcoming via email and Facebook. Our program tonight is a discussion of the November 2021 election and what it means for the future. Virginia was very carefully watched all around the country, particularly for the governor's race. But here at the Arlington Committee of 100, we're going to bring the conversation to the reactions here in Arlington, which in addition to the governor's race includes state delegates. We had a county board seat, bond initiatives, and more. A school board seat. I'm sorry, I skipped over that. Our panelists will be Jill Caiazzo, who's the chair of the Arlington County Democratic Committee, Matt Hurt, the communications director for the Arlington Republicans, David Ramadan, who's a political expert and adjunct professor at George Mason University. And I want to thank them for joining us tonight as they wind down from numerous races this season. I want to acknowledge and thank our program committee led by Delegate Patrick Hope and Jerry Laporte. The program tonight was coordinated by Patrick and by John Weisstadt, who is also on our board. So thank you to them for their work. Some of you in the audience are friends of mine. I always like checking this attendee list and I spot a lot of familiar faces. And you may know that I grew up in a politically oriented family here in Arlington, Virginia. I'm the oldest of 5, and within the 7 of us, we are a very divided family. We are divided on most topics, quite frankly, but especially on politics. We have a large extended family, so I have literally hundreds of cousins and aunts and uncles, and I commiserate with many of them on the challenges of divided nuclear families. Needless to say, elections are getting more and more challenging for families like ours. We're in a world where it feels impossible to keep your politics on the back porch, and the eruption ends up coming into dining rooms, living rooms, and more. I know some of us are mentally preparing ourselves for politics being on the guest list at our holiday parties in 2021. I was attracted to the Arlington Committee of 100 a few years ago because this organization cares about being a nonpartisan educational platform on timely local issues. We work hard to bring a variety of voices to the table, including panelists who are often at odds with each other and on opposite sides of issues. We think it's important for civic leaders in our community to be well informed on local issues and be exposed to numerous perspectives. And all of you have clearly demonstrated that this is more important than ever because our viewership has shot up dramatically and significantly diversified within the last year and a half. We really dig into issues, we field your questions, and we know we have an important platform to bring in voices of experts on local topics. This program year, we are looking for your help. We are an all-volunteer organization, so all of our funds go directly to implementing these programs. During the pandemic, our board made the decision to suspend membership dues for the organization. Now we are asking you to consider making a donation of at least $25 to the Arlington Committee of 100 to be part of our membership and help us advance this educational platform. In the coming weeks, we are going to share how you can make that donation online. For those of you who are still old school writing checks, go you. We would be grateful for a check mailed to our PO box, which is on the screen in front of you. We have some really loyal supporters of our work that we are incredibly grateful for, and we would be very grateful if you would be willing to support us financially. As we start, I do want to remind you that our panel will be followed by a Q&A session featuring questions from the audience. You can use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions in the form of a question. If you are with us every month, you know I am very strict about this. I do not read commentary, and we generally don't read questions that are, well, for one, longer. Concise is always works in your favor, but we generally we're really looking for feedback from the panelists, and we're not taking commentary and lobbying efforts. In the Q&A box, we do get a lot of that, and I always want to emphasize concise questions in the form of a question. You may get your question answered. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to our panelists, starting with Jill. As I mentioned, Jill volunteers as the chair of the Arlington County Democratic Committee, an attorney by profession. She does the Arlington County Democratic Committee outside of work. We are very grateful to have her with us today to speak on behalf of the Democrats in Arlington. So Jill, I will kick it off to you.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you to the entire committee for having me. As mentioned, I am the chair of the Arlington Democrats, and I've had the honor of holding that position for nearly 4 years. And as I approach the close of my 4th and final year as chair, I'm happy to share some reflections on the most recent election with this esteemed group. And if it's okay, I have a couple of slides to accompany these remarks, which I'm going to try to project now. For full disclosure, I'm bad at this. 2, Patrick Hope warned me that it would probably be better if I had slides that folks didn't have to stare at my face the entire time. So let's see if we can get this to work. Are they working?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. I would like to start, as I always do with Arlington Democrats meetings, with a thank you to Arlington voters, all Arlington voters. Regardless of who you supported in this election, you contributed to a record-breaking turnout in Arlington for any gubernatorial race ever. 61.5% of the county's active registered voters made it to the polls, voting on election day, by mail, at an early in-person voting location, even on a Sunday for the first year ever in Virginia. Together, we easily bested our all-time record of 60.2% turnout, which was set in 1989 when Virginia elected our first and our country's first African-American governor. We were by no means the only locality to set a turnout record this election cycle, with several blue and red leading localities doing so. But I think, to beat the record when electing for the first time in Virginia, a woman of color to statewide office, that just feels very Arlington to me. And I think that we can all take pride in that milestone, regardless of which party's lieutenant governor candidate you happen to support this year. So sincerely, thank you for being a community that is so engaged, to being such an engaged electorate. It is part of what makes Arlington such a great place to live from my perspective. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also say, thank you for voting Democratic. We really appreciate it. Given my role, I have to say that. I know it's a nonpartisan org. I'll try to keep the lobbying to a minimum here, but it is true that Arlington overwhelmingly supported the Democratic ticket this year across the board, and also supported the 4 bond measures that were approved by that were supported by the Arlington Democrats. Looking at our governor's race, I don't want to bore you with too many stats here, but I think a few stats are helpful to paint a pretty clear picture about what happened in Arlington, because I think that the locality information can be lost in the coverage, which naturally focuses on statewide trends. So just as Arlington set an overall turnout record, we also set a record for the most Democratic votes in any gubernatorial election in Arlington's history. Terry McAuliffe got about 34%, or around 24,000 votes in Arlington in 2020, more in 2021 than he did when he ran in 2013. And before you ask, I did take a look at the available population growth figures, and this percent increase well outstrips that. He also got 7%, or about 5,000 more votes here in Arlington in 2021 than Ralph Northam did in 2017, which I think is striking because the 2017 gubernatorial election was the first post-Trump inauguration wave election, and we were able to beat that in terms of Democratic number of votes cast. So even without Trump on the ballot or looking over us just across the river, Arlingtonians came out in force to vote Democratic, with the percent of the Democratic voter turnout well within the range of recent years. And that was, I think, a question on a lot of people's minds, is if Arlingtonians would respond without Trump on the ballot or across the river. Overwhelmingly, you said yes. In sum, really a solid performance for Democrats at the top of the ticket in Arlington. Obviously, the results statewide were not what Democrats wanted, but I do want to emphasize Arlington delivered very solid results for Democrats, and I want to thank you because many of you contributed to that. It's also the case that the turnout was strong and really strong Democratic support in Arlington across the entire ballot. As mentioned, Arlington had 4 House of Delegates races on the ballot, 1 county board race, and 1 school board race. And Arlington voters heavily favored the Democratic candidates in each of those races. The Democratic candidates secured more than 70% of the vote in all cases except for 1, the county board race, which was this year's only 4-way contest. So even in that heavily contested race, Takis Karantonis easily won re-election with more than 60% of the vote. And so what that leads us with is Democratic leaders who will deliver for Arlington. Takis, along with Elizabeth Bennett Parker, Patrick Hope, Rip Sullivan, Alfonso Lopez, and Mary Cadera are the Democratic leaders that we need in this moment. Arlington voters overwhelmingly indicated that they feel that the Democratic policy priorities and vision for our community and our state are what is going to move us toward progress into the future. These leaders that we've elected will hold the line for us. Sorry, as I mentioned, not great with the slides. So I know that they'd like me to also thank you on their behalf, so I'm thanking you for your support of them during this past election. But speaking of delivering, I want to acknowledge our incredible volunteers. If I can get the slide to stay. There we go. Okay. We achieved strong Democratic results in Arlington thanks to many of you. Elections are about much more than data, and I've tried to convey the enthusiasm that we saw in Arlington in this slide with just a few of the pictures that we had from the amazing outswell of volunteers from around the county. I want to thank you again to all of you who poll greeted, who canvassed, who text messaged, called, postcards, etc. The works. I could even see my dogs got into the action on the bottom right picture, and we had fun in the process. As always, your hard work was critical to helping Arlington to achieve the result that it achieved this year. So where do we go from here? What's next? As I said, the statewide elections did not go the way that the Dems wanted, despite the very strong showing in Arlington, and the party undoubtedly can take some lessons for that. Fortunately, or not, here in Virginia, we always have the opportunity to immediately apply lessons and new ideas that we have from most recent election, because we always have an election every single year. And next year is extremely important because it is the midterms. And you can bet that Arlington Democrats will be going strong, both in Arlington and through our efforts to support other localities in Virginia and even beyond. This slide that I've got up here now shows just some of the work that we did in the state around this year through our Beyond Arlington program. This is a program that we started in 2017 to help share some of the Arlington Democrats' organizing expertise and volunteer strength with other localities. And if you're wondering about how to get involved in swing districts in the midterms, Beyond Arlington is an excellent place to start. But before I get too carried away with my recruiting stump speech, because I do want to recognize that the Committee of 100 is nonpartisan and absolutely respect that. And so I also don't want to get yanked off the stage by Hannah because I know she's strict. I'm going to wrap up. And I'll end as I began, which is my practice with all Arlington Democrats leadership meetings. It is with a thank you. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes here today. Thank you for supporting Democrats. And thank you for being such a warm and welcoming community always. And since Arlington Democrats events inevitably feature me embarrassing myself with my enthusiastic support for Democrats, I threw in the picture of me as a cheerleader on this slide. I hope you appreciate it. You've been very patient listening to my more dry election stats. I remain as enthusiastic as ever about the progress which we have made together. I remain really just enthusiastic about the progress that we can make together, encouraged by the strong support that Arlington voters have shown for Democratic policy priorities and visions into the future. We have hard work ahead of us, no doubt, but this community has done hard things before and we can do it again. I hope that many of you will join me. Thank you again, and I will turn things back over to Hannah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill. Really appreciate it. I like the cheerleader picture. It's cute. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matt. Matthew Hurt is the Communications Director for the Arlington GOP. He's an experienced political strategist, especially around communications, fundraising, and mobilization. And then as a volunteer, he's the Communications Director for the Arlington GOP. Matt, turn it over to you.
Hannah, thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak with the Arlington Committee of 100. Such an excellent opportunity to be here and share my Republican principles and talk about this election right here in Arlington, where I say, when I answer the question, where do we go from here? For Arlington Republicans, there's really nowhere to go but up. I am the kid in the room full of horse manure saying there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. And I moved to Arlington in 2009 as a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed college graduate to work in movement politics and organizing. So Hannah, I know what you mean when you mention contentious conversations over the dinner table at Thanksgiving and other family holidays. And I'm really grateful for the work that your parents do in organizing. One of the awesome things about being part of the Arlington Republicans is that we have the opportunity to speak to so many of our neighbors and talk about the policies that are important to us. Glenn Youngkin ran a transformative campaign with the most diverse statewide ticket in Virginia's history, speaking to the issues that matter to Virginians and matter to Arlingtonians. Over the last 18 months, Arlington parents have struggled with the challenges and failures of Arlington public schools, and many of those voters, Republican, Democrat, and Independent alike, made their voices heard at the polls this year by talking about and voting in favor of education policies that expand opportunity and create greater opportunity for our children. On the issue of candidates, one of the things that we always talk about in the Arlington Republicans is identifying good candidates who can speak to those kitchen table issues and bring people over to our side. One of the most awesome things that we had, in addition to a transformative statewide ticket, was for the first time for as long as I can remember, 4 candidates for each of the House of Delegates districts, which touch or encompass parts of Arlington. I really want to thank those candidates for running: Ed Monroe, Laura Hall, Timothy Kilcullen, and JD Maddox, each who crafted their own, first-time candidacies to talk about the policies that were important in their respective districts and their respective races. And then I really want to thank the independent candidates for county board. Audrey Clement plays such an important role in our local public policy discourse, and the other candidates, Adam Theo, a libertarian activist, and Michael Cantwell, who came up through where so many Arlington parents and Arlington activists come through, the parent association and the neighborhood associations that are myriad across the county. One of the challenges that we face as Arlington Republicans is our membership is naturally inclined to be excited more about federal issues. And as a communications director and a longtime party activist in Arlington, one of the challenges I try to confront head on is talking about those most local issues. Things like what appeared on the ballot this year in the bond referenda. Our committee had a robust debate and discussion on the 4 bond issues on the ballot, and ultimately decided not to take a position on those 4. But those conversations played out in the public discourse on wonderful platforms like Arl Now and the Sun Gazette, and also in the yard sign coverage. And so I'm just really excited about the opportunity. Our membership is excited. We saw the most turnout for our events this year, in-person events, which I know were challenging for many Arlingtonians. And we are taking that enthusiasm of inaugurating the 74th governor of Virginia next January and filling out the ballot with Republican candidates next year. And I'm excited about our candidate recruitment efforts and really excited about our engagement efforts. I tell audiences like this that there is not an audience that I won't go and speak in front of, that we won't take our Republican message to. When I was chairman of the Arlington Falls Church Young Republicans 5 or 6 years ago, I worked hand in hand with my Arlington Young Democrat counterparts to support local nonprofits and local worthy causes. And though we may not fall on the same side of an issue or the same side of an election, there's so many opportunities to work together. With that, if you're interested in what the Arlington Republicans are doing, you can find us online at arlingtongop.org. We're on Nextdoor in the group Arlington Republicans. And if you just search Arlington Republicans in Google, anybody is welcome to our meetings. They are open to the public. If you're curious about what we have going on, about the policies we're talking about the things that are important to Arlington Republicans and voters across the political spectrum, we encourage you to come and join us at one of our upcoming meetings. With that, Hannah, I want to be respectful of the time and the panel, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Great, thank you, Matt. I appreciate y'all were earning some time for the Q&A, which I know is really a big meat of this program. So I appreciate that. Thank y'all. All right, I'm gonna hand it off to David Ramadan. David is an expert political commentator, and he has been featured on just all of the major networks. I'm not going to name them all because it's a very long list. He is a former Virginia delegate who represented the 87th district. He is also an adjunct professor at George Mason University, teaching about government and teaching in government and global affairs courses. And he's a resident scholar at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. He's a double graduate of George Mason, but I thought this was cool when I was looking him up. He's working on his doctorate of education in organizational leadership at Vanderbilt University. So David, you've got a lot on your plate. So we're gonna ask him to kind of color in some commentary from this election. And I have a note from him that he's having a little trouble turning on his camera. Scott, would you mind? All right, can you give it a try to see if you can turn on his camera yourself? We have our wonderful Scott Pedowitz, fellow board member, is in the background doing these logistics and making all of this look seamless. We hope. All right, David, you are on. Go ahead and I will kick it off to you.
Good evening. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Committee of 100 in Arlington, for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. And for all of you that are not going to like anything I said, you can blame Patrick Hope. I think you all know where to reach him. So contact Patrick and complain there. It's been an interesting election season. What happened? Before we say where we go next, let's talk a little bit about what happened. Now, I've got an op-ed that probably hit the Washington Post tomorrow, but I'll give you the gist of what I analyze to be. And I am here today in a purely political science analyst hat. Actually, it's right there, the Schar School hat. So I'm analyzing in a non-partisan way. It's probably the perfect storm that was unexpected. What started on the McAuliffe side, what started with a tagline or a logo for the campaign that said our schools, our choice, our future, I think, ended up with the education issue tanking in campaign. And that was a full circle that included multiple steps and multiple actions that were that nobody could have guessed and nobody could have worked on. And it worked right out here from Loudoun County, my backyard, and the area that I had the honor of representing in the General Assembly from 2012 to 2016. So education became the focus of the campaign, but we weren't talking here about education as far as funding. Traditionally, we talked education as far as funding. Traditionally, we talked about STEM in campaigns. This turned into a parent right issue and a tug of war between the right and the left. The left wanted to push a progressive agenda over and has been pushing a progressive agenda for some time. The right accused the left of teaching CRT in schools. We can go into a huge debate whether it's taught or not taught. That's not what we're here for. However, the elements of equity were certainly there, and that's how it was related to CRT. Then there were unfortunate actions. There was an incident where a student was raped in a high school in Loudoun. It happened that the person, the boyfriend that they have had, according to the news report, relationships with before, turned into the raper, happened to be gender fluid. The bathrooms issue got to play into this. That kid was transferred, was charged while waiting his trial, was transferred to a different high school. Accosted a girl in a different high school where he was charged again with harassment. The father of the victim, of the first victim, happened to go to the school board on a night where CRT opponents were there. That school board meeting went crazy. The sheriff deputies were trying to clear the room. The father wanted his 2 minutes. He didn't get his 2 minutes. Nobody knew it was the father. He pushed the sheriff. The sheriff deputy arrested him. This roll ball, you can see this snowball just rolling and getting bigger. And then this education issue became a parents' right issue, became a huge fight that Glenn Youngkin's campaign was able to capitalize on till the rest of the campaign. There was some residue from national issues from 2020 and before. The right to work issue became prominent, even though not in the news, but among the Northern Virginia business community. Defund the police. It didn't matter what Terry McAuliffe said as far as his support of law enforcement when he was in office and how much he will do. There was a residue among the law enforcement community and the supporting communities that Democrats wanted to defund the police. Therefore, that was used. The fight that we see across the river in DC and the inability of Congress to pass meaningful legislation. And then the ticket. The ticket on the Democratic side was all Northern Virginia based. The ticket on the Republican side included the top of the ticket, Governor-elect Youngkin, who resides now in Northern Virginia, but has his roots as well in the Virginia Beach area. And he had 2 members that added to his ticket, and regardless of your political persuasion, they definitely added on different levels. Winsome Sears got the Second Amendment vote for that ticket, and for the first time, the top of the ticket didn't have to compete for that vote, didn't have to even vie for that vote, didn't fill in the NRA surveys, was not endorsed by the NRA, yet he got the Second Amendment vote because Winsome was able to add that to him. And then Jason Miara's current delegate was able to also increase the participation of the Latino vote and had excellent Latino outreach and engagement that brought in a bunch of the minorities. Put all that together, those are the reasons. Those are the analysis. But there's that old saying that voting is as rational as falling in love. As irrational as voting in love. It's a matter of feelings. And the feelings were really, really, really high. The polarization is the highest ever. The UVA Center of Politics, where I am a resident scholar and I lecture there, I had ran recently Project Home Fire, a poll and a study that included 1,200 Virginia Biden voters and 1,200 Virginia Trump voters. And there were a lot of things that they asked them about, but more than 80% on both sides at one point pretty much said, we don't want to live with the other side in the same country. We're talking about 80% of our population, at least that are engaged politically. They voted and engaged politically of some sort, pretty much said, we don't live with the other side. And we've seen that polarization. We've all seen it in the ads, we've seen it in the discussions and so on. So what's next? We have a divided government. We have a newly elected person at the top of the ticket, a governor-elect who does not have any government experience. Becoming governor is hard even for those that come out from the system. So coming in as an outsider will have a learning curve that's going to take some time. He is an unknown, really, even after this election. People don't know where he really stands. I was told multiple times, even though Trumpism was there in the campaign, he tried to stay away from Trump and never campaigned with Trump, but the elements of Trumpism were definitely part of his campaign. We were told multiple times that, this is just political talk. That's not where he is. That's not where he believes. I'll leave
David,
judgment
I'm going to give
out.
you a time check. If you could go ahead and wrap up, and then we'll move on to Q&A. Sorry.
Certainly. And we continue, and then the House flipped from the Democrats to the Republicans, yet the Democrats still hold the Virginia Senate. So one can look at it in 2 ways. It's either going to be gridlock where they'll fight each other out, and that could be the case because of this polarized atmosphere, or we could see a wave of cooperation where they'll have to compromise on both sides in order to get things done, because otherwise everything's going to stop. Now, we're still going to have government running, we're still going to have policing, we're still going to have funding. Arlington County is going to get their money from the state budget, but I'm talking, it'll be status quo per se, instead of having new developments, new progress, regardless of what progress is to either side at this point. That's where we are. I'm looking forward to answering questions, and hopefully I gave you a brief description of how did we get to this during this election and what's coming up next. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. All right, we are going to go on to the Q&A period. I'm going to ask our panelists to go ahead and turn their cameras back on. I want to remind our audience that if you are in Zoom with us, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen where you can enter questions. We did have some questions prior to the event as well, so I'm going to go ahead and launch into them. Panelists, what I generally do is I ask these questions and then sometimes I leave you in an awkward pause because I want to give you the opportunity to decide which ones you want to speak out on, make a comment on, some rather than me try to direct what I think makes most sense, because sometimes you know a little bit better than I do. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off with the first question from Clifton. He asks, what are the most important issues that need to be addressed after the November election?
Well, I certainly, from my side, I'm happy to jump in here. I think that COVID recovery remains a top priority, both in Arlington and I think statewide. We're thankful, I think, to be coming out of hopefully what is the worst of the pandemic. We will see in the coming winter, but there are plenty of people who have been hurt by it. And we want to make sure that as we are building back from the recovery perspective, that we're doing so in a way that really reaches to everyone. And so from my point of view, I think that economic issues were one of the drivers in this election. I take David's point entirely that schools likewise are top of mind for folks. I think they do go hand in hand because your children being at home and having available childcare can impact economic opportunity. And so I think that focus on COVID recovery is going to be really vital as we move forward. And like David, and yourself, I believe, I think we hope all that our legislators and the statewide will be able to work together to help us move forward. And I certainly believe that Arlington's representatives can do that.
Jill makes an excellent point. COVID recovery, I think, is one of the most important issues, both economic and educational. What we've seen over the last 8 months, especially, is had there not been a gubernatorial and a statewide election this year, the current governor would have shut down the economy again, would have compelled Virginians to mask up again, and we would have seen the prolonged death of small business, like my friends at Spirits at 76 in Clarendon, who were shuttered and closed permanently because of prolonged economic shutdown. We saw in March of last year, one of the most affluent school districts in the country stop teaching new curriculum to students for a full 4 months while they figured out what was going on, and then closed for the remainder of the pandemic, struggling to reopen in a place where many of my neighbors are highly educated, affluent federal employees or auxiliaries, and they suddenly realized that their children were not learning anything new. Once the children got back into the classroom, parents were concerned about the policies around COVID reopening. That's when we saw, at the height of the conversation around Arlington Parents for Education and the debate in the Democratic endorsement process for the school board race, parents, mostly Democratic parents, mostly mothers, who were passionate and concerned about what was going on in our schools. It was a dereliction of duty for the political status quo, and it hit especially hard in one-party Arlington, where both small businesses struggled through this pandemic, my friends who run restaurants and small businesses, and the education outlook for parents who expected the best from their schools and the best for their children. Just across the county line, we saw the lessening of the academic standards at Thomas Jefferson, a school that is of unique importance to many in the AAPI community in Northern Virginia, and we saw an erosion of those standards by again the progressive left in Arlington and across Northern Virginia that really struck a chord with a lot of parents who care about achieving the American dream. My friend Patty, again, I'll reference our friends at Spirits of 76. One of the owners of that restaurant came to this country to become an American citizen, was a bartender, owned his own business, co-owned his own business before becoming an American citizen, only to have it shuttered by the policies of this party. The Arlington Republicans present an alternative, maximum education opportunity, and this governor is going to provide for that. Terry McAuliffe was again the status quo on education policy, kowtowing and believing what the teachers unions told him. He was not going to reopen the economy in a way, and in fact, we would have seen likely more closures in this current wave. We have to reopen the economy. This governor will do that. We have to reopen our schools. This governor will do that. And we have to get Virginia back on the right track to becoming the state that people want to move and relocate their families and their businesses.
So I think that fiery hellscape is wildly overstated and belied by the election results that I noted in my presentation, which is precisely why I noted them. Arlingtonians overwhelmingly voted in favor of continued Democratic leadership with respect to the COVID crisis, with respect to the economy, and with respect to schools across the board. Arlington Democrats also supported the school bond because we recognize that investment in our schools is critical to the post-COVID recovery that we need to see in our schools as well as in the economy. So I just want to insert some facts here into how Arlingtonians are viewing the current state of the recovery and the Democratic leadership throughout it, and would reference my earlier slides on that point.
Dave, is there anything you want to add before we move on to the next question?
Move on.
Okay. Scott asks, we're pivoting a little bit on this one. Scott asks, in statewide elections, rural votes count just as much as urban and suburban ones, like the ones around here. Why did Republicans do so well and Democrats do poorly with rural voters this year? And what does that mean for the future?
I think Glenn Youngkin ran a campaign that really took his bus everywhere. One of the things I heard from my friends downstate was, or in the more rural areas, is that they vote reliably Republican, but no Republican candidate or Democrat candidate ever comes to knock on their door, ever comes to see them. In the last 2 weeks of the campaign, Glenn had easily 3, 4, 5 events each day from 7:30 in the morning to 9 at night that fired up voters across the Commonwealth. And he went to every corner of the state. He didn't just go to the population centers. He popped into small restaurants in Abingdon and Wytheville. He popped into businesses near Virginia Beach. He would speak to anyone who would listen to his message. And it was because it was a positive, forward-thinking message about reopening Virginia and reopening our schools. Whereas, the Democrat at the top of the ticket ran ads like this. Jill made a comment at the beginning of this presentation that Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot, but boy, they sure wish that he was, because they ran dozens of ads mentioning Trump. CNN and MSNBC even said that, Donald Trump isn't on the ticket. What's going on here? Why is your message about Donald Trump? And Terry McAuliffe said, the campaign isn't about Trump. Talking to voters in Virginia, in Arlington specifically, urban educated voters, that messaging just didn't stick with the people that we were speaking to at their door across North Arlington and South Arlington. So I think Glenn ran a campaign that was positive and forward-looking. He went everywhere. And Terry ran a low-energy campaign that relied on 2020 as the path forward.
So I think it's a fair criticism that Democrats need to find better ways to speak to rural voters. I know that when Arlington Democrats go out and speak to voters in other localities through our Beyond Arlington program, we have great success, and it can bring that enthusiasm to the doorstep and really connect with people on a one-on-one basis. So certainly it can be done, and we have done it time and time again with our Beyond Arlington program. And we are looking to the future and seeking to expand it further, because I know when we are out there speaking to voters and we are supporting our neighbors and localities and speaking to voters, regardless of which locality we're talking about, we can get results. And so I think what you'll see, what in terms of what's next is a really doubling down on how do we differentiate our message across different kinds of localities, whether it's urban or rural, in order to make clear how Democratic policy priorities really can advance the ball, not only for folks who live in urban areas like Arlington, but those who are out in the rural communities as well. And so I think that really looking forward to engaging in those conversations with folks next year as we turn to the next election and beyond.
This is a numbers game, right? I mean, you need to hit certain number of voters in order to win. And both parties at different times at different elections had taken for granted part of their base or their base overall. And we've seen that by Republicans in the past that have taken the rural vote for granted, just like we've seen that by Democrats that have taken the vote up in Northern Virginia and the Virginia Beach and Hampton Roads area for granted. Those that expand, those that go beyond their base and able to do two things. One, be able to bring some of the independents their way. Independents that voted for Biden, voted for Youngkin in Northern Virginia this year. And if they're able to bring out a higher number of participation from the base, we know they're registered, you know that they're there, they just don't show up. And there's nothing that beats Matt gave a very good Republican point of view, and he's entitled to that. And I'm not gonna argue his Republican point of view here, but I will agree with him that there's nothing more important than knocking on somebody's door, whether literally or close to that, by being in their neighborhood and asking for their vote. And that's not something that is just Republican or Democrat. Glenn Youngkin did a good job at that this time in the rural vote because he needed those numbers. Had he not been able to turn out that number, there's no way he could have made up those numbers from Northern Virginia. So he needed those numbers, and there was a very concentrated campaign to bring out those numbers. Democrats can get some of that vote as well, and have in the past. Mark Warner gets a good segment of that vote because Mark Warner goes all over the Commonwealth, and he's in his jeans and in his khakis, and he goes out to farms around Southern Virginia and Southwest Virginia, all the way down to Abingdon, Matt, and he has done a good job getting that vote as well. So going to people, knocking on their door, getting the vote, whether it's suburban or urban, whether it's Nova or Rova, is again a requirement of a campaign, in addition to being able to swing voters. Suburban moms went to Youngkin this time, then to White in the past. Neither party, and I warn both sides here, neither party has a mandate out of this election. Both parties need to really earn that vote again. And as we mentioned earlier, we have an election every year. In Virginia, we're going to have even special elections in addition to the standard elections. It looks like all 100 members of the Virginia House may be on the ticket again next year and the following year. I know that's burning Patrick's ears right now, but they most likely are going to be on the ticket for a special election next year, and then again for a regular election the following year. And they're going to vie for that same vote again. And those that are going to work and come to compromise and come a little bit to the center are going to be able to get that swing vote that is not owned by either party. And those are going to work harder with their base and turn them out. Those are the ones going to win. The one good thing that came out of this election, regardless of where you stand on the political, we had the highest number of votes that we had in a long time. Everybody brought out their base. Everybody brought out their base this time. And that's a good thing. The more we have people participate, the better.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to just give us a time check here at 7:45. I'm going to politely ask our panelists to be as economical as you can be with your words. You all three of you are incredibly articulate and well-spoken and have lots of wonderful things to say, but I'm going to ask you to keep that as concise as you can for the remainder of the questions so we can get to as many as possible. Patrick asks, are there any 2017 to 2021 Democratic-led legislative issues that were out of step with moderate voters?
No.
That was very economical, Jill.
Depending of what are we defining today out of step, and depending what are we defining moderate, and we've seen this flip. Nobody would have ever thought that that shutting down a school, and Monday quarterbacking is fine, but it's not. Before doing so, shutting down schools in a national pandemic would become out of step with moderate voters, right? Common sense at the time and science at the time said that those are the absolute steps that needs to be taken. Now, as Matthew mentioned earlier, that is out of step with the Republican voter. That is also out of step with quite a bit of the moderate voters, as we discovered, because I think they had been okay with the first month or two. They were not okay with the full year. And especially after, or the rest of they would have been okay with the remainder of that year when COVID started, but not the start of the next year as it happened. So there's quite a bit of those. And I think my former colleagues in the House and the Senate in Virginia will probably spend quite a bit of time going through those and try to figure out what did they push that ended up hurting, and should they do that again or not. My 2 cents to both sides is that if you're going to push the far right or the far left agenda in the next session, it's going to hurt.
But let's be clear, I mean, that was not a part of the legislative agenda.
No.
And I think that's what the question was regarding. I think that common sense gun safety reform, criminal justice reform to address this moment in our country, and all of the other reforms that we saw the Democratic controlled General Assembly achieve over the past 2 years with Ralph Northam signing those laws into reality, those were wildly supported by folks within Virginia, and certainly folks who are within earshot of this transmission. So I just want to be clear, when we're talking about legislative accomplishments, this Democratic-led General Assembly with Democratic leadership in the governor's mansion delivered. We decreased child poverty by an enormous amount within this state while fighting a COVID crisis. Those were the legislative priorities that should have been trumpeted from the rooftops every time that we were on the campaign trail. And that I will take criticism for, but not the actual priorities that were achieved through the General Assembly, because I believe that those do resonate with moderate voters who have seen the progress that we've made in these important areas.
I think what we saw in 2017 and 2019 was a number of high-profile progressives who were elected, who made it very easy to make a House of Delegates race about the entire Commonwealth and the makeup of the House of Delegates. We saw some fairly high-profile progressives who were elected and then defeated in subsequent nominating contests, primary contests. One quick note about former Delegate Ramadan's comments. I will say the school closures have a silver lining. It created thousands of new homeschoolers and thousands of new school choice advocates across the Commonwealth. And that in turn will create thousands of new voters who will always vote for the candidates who support expanding educational opportunity, even in a place like Arlington, where Arlington Parents for Education, again, a majority Democratic organization, engaged and involved on the issues around Arlington public schools and the failure in the first 4 months of the shutdown of teaching no new curriculum under the guise of equity. Again, one of the most affluent counties in the country fell down on teaching the most vulnerable and our children in this county because of dogma. And so this is what we're seeing in Arlington, and I think that translated with voters across the Crescent counties down into Richmond and Henrico. The big education issue was not
Matt,
CRT.
I'm just going to ask you to keep an eye on time.
Sure.
If you want to finish your sentence, but yeah, we're going to keep going.
I think it was that, providing basic educational opportunity for children, and Arlington failed on that last year, and the voters took note.
Great, thanks. All right, we're going to switch to the other side here and ask, Rich is asking, what will it take for Republicans to be competitive in Arlington, and is it even possible?
I love that question.
Jill, why don't we let Jill go first this time, Matt? I think you've taken the first shot at it a couple times now. Go ahead, Jill.
My first thought is would be to run candidates. I hear consistently and saw on the yard signs that popped up towards the end of the race that end one party rule. I think that criticism of voters is first a strange campaign strategy when the Republicans have not run candidates. Similarly, to not take a stand on bond issues of critical importance like infrastructure and schools, certainly as we've seen waxing poetic on school choices, I think is not a responsible approach, and voters react to that. So I think what would be required is, the courage of their own convictions to stand up candidates, to stand up with respect to bond issues, so that folks can evaluate those convictions. And I think that the results will be the same, but that would be the starting point from my perspective.
I agree with Jill. We had great first-time candidates this year for House of Delegates. I want more candidates to run for county board and for more conservatives to run for school board. So if you're interested in changing the discourse in Arlington, email us at info@arlingtongop.org. If you're interested in running for office, there's a young woman who works at one of the restaurants in Clarendon already exploring an opportunity to run for county board next year. This election did drive up enthusiasm, and we're seeing a lot of candidates, a lot of potential and prospective candidates who want to run. And as Delegate Ramadan said, we may have an opportunity to run for House of Delegates next year. And so I know Delegate Hope is on the call. Laura Hall is coming for you one more time at least. So we're looking forward to fielding those candidates.
David, before we move on to the next question, I just want to give you a quick one. All right, we'll keep going.
I'll let
We're going to get hyper
I'll
local.
let the Arlington folks fight that one out.
Okay, I'm going to get hyper local. Julius asks for David, should political parties endorse candidates or get involved in nonpartisan school board elections?
Look, everything in life is politics, right? And nothing is closer to the people than local politics. In Virginia, they run independently, so they don't run with an R or a D behind their name on school board level. However, very rarely they are truly independent. What happens is that they normally go to the local committee and get the endorsement, and they go on the sample ballot and they get the support of that committee. Politics has become very expensive, especially if we're talking in Arlington and Northern Virginia. And for anybody to run a decent race for any level of office, you would need quite a bit of money in order to reach the constituency and be able to spread your message. So if you don't have parties involved, the downside of that is that you're going to end up with millionaires only that are going to run for office, right? Because it's very, very hard to raise money for a school board race, and you're going to end up only with the wealthy that are going to run. Versus when you have political parties involved, you will be able, there's a base, there's a mechanism, there are lists, there's a way to spread your message through the party, and that's how you end up doing it. As long as parties, there's pros and cons to everything, as long as parties don't go to the far side of politics, which we've seen quite a bit of from both parties in the recent years, as long as parties don't go to the far side of politics, parties are a good thing. And I actually prefer that these candidates would actually have an R or D behind them so that everybody knows where they stand, or an I if they really are not endorsed by either one, an independent, versus they are independent, but they're supported here and there. So the pros and cons to all. I think being part of a party at this point of time is more practical. However, it's pretty hard for independents truly in thought to do so nowadays, because both parties have been polarized.
So we have one more question that I want to squeeze in. And since that question was specifically directed to David, I want to give it to him, but I do want to, Matt or Jill, if you want to give like a 20, if you could get into 20 seconds of response on that, I'd be happy to pass that off to you if you have anything you want to respond on the school board piece.
I think the school board endorsement process from over the summer speaks for itself. And I think Arlington Public Schools tweeting from their official account from a Joe Biden rally in July speaks for itself. The school board is not independent, and the nomination or endorsement process runs straight through the Democratic Party in this county.
Yep, you are correct that it does, and it will continue to be that way because the schools are so important to our future, and what we do in them matters so much. You see in Loudoun County and the examples that David provided of how politicized our schools have become and how important Democratic leadership is in them at this time. So the Arlington Democrats will continue to endorse in the school board race because we recognize the importance of it. We recognize the role that we play as leaders in this county, and we are, you know, excited to be supporting Mary Kadera as she starts on the school board in the winter.
Great, thanks, y'all. All right, so we're gonna wrap up on a question that I am looking forward to asking, and kind of gets back to a couple of the things I was in my personal experience, certainly, but I know, David, you spoke about as well. It is clear that some of the polarization we see in society is based on some of the coverage in cable news outlets, and they use Fox and CNN as examples there. What responsibilities do you see news organizations as having as far as balanced and less ideological coverage as we move forward to a hopefully more unified society in the future? And I will give you, I'm going to ask if y'all could keep your remarks to about a minute because we have 3 minutes left.
I'm going to give you less than a minute. Good luck. You're never going to get it.
Matt, I see you.
I consume WAMU, ARL Now, the Sun Gazette, and VPAP for most of my Virginia political news. So, you know, it's up to each individual voter to identify news sources that are important to him or her.
Jill, you want to wrap up?
I think it is the scourge of our times, and I strongly agree with the questioner that to the extent that we can help, you know, to move the media towards more balanced reporting, some of the outlets that Matt described, I think do meet the spirit of that. That would be to the benefit of the country, though I share David's somewhat pessimistic outlook.
Great, thank you, y'all. Well, you're on my screen in order of David, Jill, Matt, the three of y'all. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight. I know this was it's tough to get an evening, I know, on all of your calendars on Wednesday, but right after an election season when you are probably looking for a lot of time to yourself and with your families and with your friends, and probably very tired of these conversations, quite frankly. But we are grateful to have you here tonight. Thank you for being here. I want to ask our audience,
if I may.
Oh, yes.
Just a quick final thought.
Okay.
It was great to see a huge number of Virginians that, as I mentioned earlier, participate in this election. Go ahead and push people to register to vote. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. In Virginia, it's the easiest thing ever to do so. You can register online. It takes seconds. It is quick. It's easy. It's secure. I know. I wrote that law. So register online.
Thank you, David. And I will, and as a nonpartisan organization, I feel very comfortable saying, please register to vote. We really encourage everyone in our audience, if you are registered to vote, please find the people in your circle who need to register to vote and encourage them to do so. Thank you for that final plug, David. I really appreciate it. For those of you who are with us tonight, I do want to remind you again to register for our program next month, discussing the future of the National Landing neighborhood. We're really excited to have you there on Wednesday, December 8th at 7 p.m. Thank you again, Jill, Matt, and David, for having us. If you all want to watch the recording tonight, you can go to our Facebook page and view it there. Again, you can share that recording from your Facebook page. We also are going to have the recording for this program up on our website. You hear me say every month, we are an all-volunteer organization, so I never make promises on how fast that goes up on our website. We'll get it there ASAP. That's what we're trying to do. That is on www.arlingtoncommittee100.org. Thanks for joining us tonight, and see you here next month.
Thank you.